So if you want to make yourself slightly dangerous, when you have a window installation company installing windows at your house and you're not sure if they're doing the right thing or not, you can always reference the NOAs. Now, my best recommendation is to let the inspectors do their job. You can show up when the inspectors are there, take pictures and show the inspectors. You know, if you're having issues of distrust with the company, you can show them whatever pictures may be a concern to you. At the same time, the inspectors don't necessarily get into aesthetics. Like if you don't like the way that a caulking job was done, or if you have a stucco repair that was done and it's unsightly, typically the inspectors don't get involved in that. What they're looking for is building code. Is your home going to be safe? Because a lot of people don't know this. When the inspectors sign off, they are actually taking on some liability as well, saying that they inspected and they approved the installation of whatever product it may be, whether it's, you know, flooring, your framing, your foundation, whatever the inspection may be, but we'll keep it specific to windows. So here, what I want to talk about is the NOAs and how to, you know, understand some basics on here. And if you have any specific questions, you can always reach out to us. We're happy to help. Even if you went with somebody else, we're still here to help you make things right. So this is our cover page. I chose Eurocraft just because they were the first ones that popped up in my search on my computer. So this is kind of like an introduction. It talks about like different glazing details, like how the windows are made. And the difference between NOAs and a Florida product approval is NOAs is a notice of acceptance, and that's what is approved by that's what you to is being county approved. Basically being in high velocity hurricane zone where standards are going to be a little bit higher. We also have Florida product approval codes, which are products that are approved in the state of Florida, which will typically have very strong standards as well. So then getting into more details, you'll see SMIs and LMIs, that's small missile impacts and large missile impacts. We'll cover that in a different video. For now, we're just going to go over the basics and kind of how to understand the NOA a little bit better if you have any concerns. So we get into glazing details. This basically talks about your maximum openings, you know, it kind of shows you the elevations, talks about the product. That's not necessarily what I wanted to come in here. We are going to get into like screw spacing, maximum 16 inches on center. However, typically the manufacturer and any manufacturer will already have those holes pre-drilled, making our job a little bit easier. You know, and they don't want the first screw further than 6 inches from the corner. Just for example, we have our design pressures, which we'll get into in another video. What I want to talk about is more the installation here and what to look for. So we have some different lock options, and these are all part of the approval process. This is a document that has been submitted, looked at, and approved, along with a lot of testing that went in the process of getting these windows or these storefront doors approved. So this page, which is 12 of 14, we get into the screws that is going through the frame, what kind of anchor we have, the substrate we are going into, what kind of anchor we should be using, the minimum embedment, and the minimum edge distance, which that is what I want to cover. That's what we're going to get into, because this, in my opinion, is the most important thing. Like if your windows are not held properly by the screws, do you have an impact window or do you have a riot shield? Like, you know, it's very important. I've unfortunately been called to jobs where they're missing screws. The screws, they installed the windows into hollow block where the screws are just like hanging in the air. You can literally go and like flick the screw or the anchor that's there. You know, just absolutely horrible things. Not that that happens all the time, but we do see this in rare circumstances. So once again, this is what I want to cover and focus on. So when we're going into 2x wood, so in South Florida, you're going to see a lot more concrete construction. However, you know, as we go up the coast, especially on the West Coast, we do see a lot more wood framed. And as you go up to North Florida, we do see a lot of wood frame houses. So we'll start with that. So when you have a 2x wood, which basically could be a 2x4, 2x6, 2x8, just depending on the structure of the house or building, they want us to use a 5/16. That's the thickness of the screw. They want us to embed that screw at least at 1.5 inches, and they want us to be 1.5 inches from the edge. And that's what I'm going to get into. So if this is our structure, or actually this would be the outside of the house, this would be the inside of the house, our screw has to be 1.5 inches, the center of this screw. So we have to have 1.5 inches minimum over here and 1.5 inches minimum over here. So this door can't be all the way towards the edge. So what you'll typically see, you know, and the way that you can tell the difference between a wood frame structure and a block structure is that the doors and the windows in a wood frame structure are typically like flush with the front of the house, whereas when you have a concrete structure or a masonry opening, you'll typically see that the window's recessed. So if you have a wall that is a 2x4, you know, your 2x4 is really 3.5 inches. So that screw has to be like dead center on the 2x4 in order to make it. There are other types of options, which we'll get into another video, you know, in regards to like fin windows versus flange windows. That's a whole nother subject. For now, we're just focused on flange windows, talking about different structures. So it's very important that that screw is like pretty much dead center in the opening. And then also we want to have a minimum embedment of 1.5 inches. So if this screw, let's just say, and this is what we see a lot of, and this is like our most common violation, if you will, or our most common mistake, is that the installers don't measure the windows properly and they end up with a very large gap in between the frame of the window and the wood or the concrete that they're screwing into. So this is usually filled, you know, with shims, or, you know, they'll put wood, things like that. But what the inspector should be checking for is that this part of the screw is actually embedded into the structure 1.5 inches. Now, in the case that there are specific site conditions, the window business is not by any means an easy business. We do have to deal with a lot of conditions and basically make those conditions as best as possible. See a lot of like metal gauge framing on houses or buildings down here in South Florida, and we typically don't see a lot of like steel or aluminum buildings. They are there, and we have installed windows, but it's not so common. I just want to focus on wood and concrete. So, and then when we have a concrete opening, our concrete blocks, the long side is 16 inches, they're 8 inches tall, and they're 8 inches deep. 16, 8, 8. Easy numbers to remember. So when we take that long block and we turn it sideways, we have 8 inches to install this window. There is a code that basically tells us that the window does have to be recessed a certain amount. Once again, those minimum edge distances will apply in this case as well. So when you look down here, we're still using the same kind of anchor. The minimum embedment will actually be a little bit deeper, and then our minimum edge distance is a little bit wider. So once again, coming here to the threshold, we want our screw to be a little bit deeper in the masonry or the concrete. And we also want that minimum edge distance from the inside or the outside from the center of the screw to be 2.5 inches in either direction. My brother actually did a video fairly recently where, let's say from here, so this is looking top down. Basically, if you cut above the window and you're looking at the wall here, your window would basically come out right here, and then you'd have another wall right here. You'd be looking at your sill, looking from the top down, where this window was pushed all the way forward. Now here, it actually looks like the window is pushed forward, so this is not really the best depiction. However, the minimum edge distance is what we're after. So I mean, my advice to homeowners, your biggest things that you're looking out for is really the space here. And you can see this little rectangle here, that is a wood buck is what they are depicting. And that wood buck could be part of the consideration in regards to that minimum embedment. So 1.75 inches, say this wood buck is a 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch. We would only need to go 1 inch into the masonry opening, which is here. Once again, if you guys have any questions, we'd love to help you out. We're always here to answer questions, educate homeowners. If you feel unsafe or unsure what to do in a process and you're in a bad place, please reach out. At the bare minimum, we can just have a conversation and try to educate you. Chances are you have a great company you're working with and there's just some things you don't completely understand, or worst case scenario, we can help you get away, or we can help you get out of a bad situation.